my wife over a few days could be upsetting for many people. Until last year, I would have felt the same way. But I've learned that we can never know how we might react in different situations, especially when unexpected events occur. Since our honeymoon, my wife and I have taken the same vacation every year. I mean every year, the same motel, the same dates, and sometimes even the same room for 17 years. To many, this sounds dull, and it probably would be in normal circumstances. But with our limited time in the spring and a strict budget, we just couldn't find a better option. This place was always affordable, which was a big plus for us. It came with great amenities as well. It had everything we wanted for a spring getaway. A lovely beach, tasty food, quiet surroundings, and all just outside our door. We even got to know the motel owners well. There was nothing we disliked about it. However, after a few years of enjoying our little paradise, we noticed it became more popular with spring break crowds. For those of us just wanting to relax, it felt like a wave of excitement that took over our peaceful spot. Once they found Panama City Beach, it was only a matter of time before they discovered Fort Walton. If you visited Fort Walton Beach in the late 80s or early 90s, you would understand what I mean. It was a nice beach with hardly any spring break visitors. You didn't worry about finding a room. A week's stay cost about $45 per night, and you met people your own age. Sadly, we watched as our quiet retreat changed with the influx of crowds. Even after the spring breakers arrived, we kept coming back. This was our special place, filled with memories we weren't ready to let go of. However, we accepted that if we wanted to keep visiting, we had to adjust. Thankfully, they weren't too rowdy. We were able to enjoy our time there. Last year was different in many ways. We found ourselves surrounded by spring breakers again, which wasn't unusual for late March, but this time it felt like we were attracting a lot of attention. It didn't take long for them to learn that we were both teachers at a community college in our hometown of Columbus, Ohio. This seemed to be why they were drawn to us. They were really intrigued by the fact that we were just regular people who knew how to enjoy ourselves. I imagined they thought we spent most of our free time coming up with ways to surprise them. At first, most of them kept their distance, treating us like we were in charge or someone important. But after a couple of days, they realized we were just ordinary folks. By the second day, we found that the back porch of our suite was becoming a favorite hangout spot for some of them. Initially, I thought it was mainly because we had a good supply of drinks, but I soon saw that they enjoyed mixing and sharing their drinks with ours. I noticed it often enough to know it worked well for everyone. Most of them were quite friendly, so we decided to go along with it. We also tended to buy more drinks than we needed to avoid multiple trips to the store. It was funny because my wife and I usually only drink a few times a year, but you would have thought we were big drinkers with how much we bought. We were strict about who could drink, and surprisingly, they respected our main rule. Even though there weren't many people over 30 around, several young men from the University of Georgia were quite taken with my wife, Gina. I wasn't surprised at all. At our school, she had a nickname that revealed how popular she was among her male students. Over time, we both noticed that her male students tended to do better than the female students. To me, it made sense. They were likely trying to impress her. Gina often joked that it was because of her great teaching, but I would tease her back, saying, having a great presence isn't the only reason. She's the kind of college teacher you might see in a film, but she's genuinely smart, kind, and very professional. News about her qualities spread quickly at the motel, and it seemed to earn her a lot of attention from the young men there. I sometimes wish I could ignore the way they looked at her, but I knew why they were paying attention. It was more than just her outfit. She really is beautiful, and it's understandable why she catches the eyes of her students and the men around her. People say that if men look at a woman as she walks by, she's beautiful. But if both men and women look, then she's really attractive. I can confidently say that Gina is really attractive. She is 5'3", weighs 108 pounds, has a great figure, smooth skin, and a lovely, innocent face. It didn't matter that she was a college professor. Her charm was enough to catch anyone's attention. On our second day at the motel, we decided to drive to her sister's house, which was just 10 minutes from Panama City Beach. We often spent the whole day there catching up with each other. It had become our spring tradition. Later that evening, when we returned to the motel, we noticed a group of guys from the University of Georgia sitting on our back porch. It wasn't unusual since they had gotten to know us. When we approached, we saw they had set up a small table and were playing a drinking game that required losers to take shots. It seemed they were losing quite a bit. As we walked up, Gina joked, "Boys, that's a game where nobody feels good in the morning." They all laughed and encouraged us to join them. I'm not usually one to engage in playful banter, but Gina couldn't resist. She instantly replied, "First of all, most of you seem a bit tipsy already, and I'm not one of your friends who pretends to be tipsy after a shot." This made them more excited. After about 20 minutes of back and forth teasing, Gina finally said, "All right, I'll play. Even if I lose, I bet I'll be standing while most of you will be on the floor." I had to hold back my laughter, knowing she wasn't the best at holding her drinks and was bluffing against guys who took drinking very seriously. After a while, Gina and I went into our room to change. I came back to the deck well before Gina and poured myself a drink as we waited for her. We chatted about everything and nothing. The guys kept telling me how they would teach her a lesson in drinking, boasting about their skills, how many games they had played, and how much they could handle. At times, it felt like they might be exaggerating. They quickly added, "But we'll take it easy. We can stop any time." I started to wonder if anyone would still be able to talk by the time Gina returned. With each minute, I thought Gina might be right about them ending up on the floor. With the game paused, they kept drinking beer and taking shots the whole time. Just as I was about to check on Gina, she slid the glass door open and stepped outside. She was wearing a bikini with a tank top over it, which seemed normal for our location, even with 6 college students around. One of the tipsy students immediately said, "Mr. and Mrs. Arnett, I have to say this, Gina. You are the most amazing college professor ever." She laughed and playfully tapped him on the shoulder, saying, "Don't think that will win you any favors, my friend. You'll be passed out soon and I'll be laughing at you tomorrow. If you can manage to get out of bed after the hangover you're going to have." They were all teasing each other, and I just sat back, laughing as they enjoyed their drinking game. After a few rounds, one of them jokingly said, "Mr. Arnett, with all due respect, I think your wife is outshining us, so we should raise the stakes." I chuckled, understanding the playful challenge, and replied, "Yes, she does seem to be doing well. What are you thinking?" He quickly suggested, "Let's make it interesting with some fun challenges." Gina was only on her 3rd shot when she interrupted, saying, "Oh, aren't we clever? I'm winning and you're all suggesting silly challenges? Try again." I should mention that Gina had been playfully flirting with these young men for a couple of days. She and I had our own playful game that we enjoyed on vacations. I liked her teasing, and I often told her how much I appreciated it. After a while, she admitted that it was a bit exciting for her too, but from the start, she made it clear that flirting was where it ended. She always reminded me that this playful banter was fun, and that it added spice to our relationship without needing to go further. She often emphasized this because of a past conversation where I shared a fantasy of mine, imagining her being with someone else. It was something she found hard to accept. She believed that the only reason a man would have such a thought was if he wanted to justify being with another woman. I understood her point of view, but that wasn't what I meant. So teasing and flirting in front of me became our fun little agreement. As the night went on, the young men kept teasing her, insisting that challenges would show who was brave. Bless her heart, she was so focused on winning that she didn't recognize what was happening around her. I knew they were letting her win, setting things up for a moment where they could catch her off guard. I have to admit I was getting a bit caught up in the excitement, too. I'd seen Gina countless times, but never in a situation like this, surrounded by all these guys. It was definitely something different. I stayed quiet for a bit, but then suddenly blurted out, "You're doing great, babe. At this rate, they'll be the ones looking silly." She laughed and pulled her legs up onto the chair, wrapping her arms around her knees like she was trying to cover herself, saying, "Come on now, everyone here still has most of their clothes on. Is this game supposed to be fast? Or are you all just slowing down because I'm winning?" Everyone was watching her, though she didn't seem to notice how much attention she was getting. Her playful attitude made it clear she wasn't backing down. She was playing into their plan, but I encouraged her, saying things like, "You've barely lost a few hands, you're doing fine." Deep down, I wondered how far she would take it. Part of me was curious, but I also knew her well. After being married to her for 17 years, I couldn't quite predict what she would do, especially with all the fun and energy in the air. After a few more minutes, she said, "Okay, let's at least take this inside if we're going to keep acting like kids." I was surprised. Thought she might stop the game altogether, but she didn't. The others grabbed the cards and their drinks, teasing her along the way, saying things like, "You won't keep playing, you're going to quit." She and I exchanged looks, as if to reassure each other that it was all just for fun. Once inside, the group started taking some drinks before continuing the game. Gina wasn't going to be left out, so she joined in. At this point, I could tell she was determined to keep going, though she believed she had been winning fairly the whole time. It was funny to see her sneak on a pair of flip-flops, giving me a playful grin like she was going to count those as part of her outfit. In the first round back, she and a few others had to give something up. Gina tossed her tank top onto the bed, still looking confident, as if she didn't really think it mattered. We all sat around, drinking and chatting for at least 10 minutes before the next round began. To everyone's surprise, Gina legitimately won the next 2 rounds, leaving 3 of the guys in their last pieces of clothing. It still seemed like they were letting her win to keep her in the game, and at this point, Gina had talked so much that it would have been hard for her to back out. Before the next hand was dealt, they made a new rule since someone was bound to lose the round. The rule was that if someone ended up in their last piece of clothing, they could get dressed again after 5 minutes while the game continued. As the next round was dealt, I noticed Gina looked at her cards with concern. She swapped 3 cards like the others and muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." The guys started teasing her, saying, "Oh, the big winner didn't get the card she needed?" Gina shot back, "I don't know what you're all laughing at. 2 of you are about to lose everything, and all I'm losing is my flip-flops." They laughed and teased her about not wearing flip-flops when the game started, but eventually, they let her keep them on. As the game went on, there was a lot of playful banter. Gina joined in, teasing the ones who were losing, saying, "Hey, remember, this was your idea. Time to face the consequences." The lighthearted teasing continued for a while, and eventually, a couple of the guys had to admit defeat and removed their last items. Gina looked away for a moment, covering her face with her hand, embarrassed but smiling. She quickly turned back, trying to act like everything was fine. As her husband in this strange situation, I couldn't help but glance around as well. Let's be honest, if you're in a game like this, you're bound to make some comparisons, even if you act like you're not paying attention. One of the guys seemed pretty nervous, while another was clearly trying to stay relaxed. Gina glanced over too, but played it cool, as if everything was completely normal. It briefly crossed my mind that it was larger than mine, but I quickly pushed that thought aside and focused on what was happening. Both guys tried to cover themselves awkwardly as Gina kept teasing them, saying, "Oh, let's play strip shots. You've got 5 minutes. Don't forget." A few minutes later, Gina and the last guy still in his underwear dealt their cards. By this time, Gina was definitely feeling the effects of the drinks she'd had. She picked up her cards, her expression changing as she realized she might lose. She carefully rearranged her cards several times before finally laying them down in frustration, clearly feeling like the odds were against her. When she was dealt new cards, Gina quickly threw them down and said, "Okay, you win, I'm done. You said I could quit whenever I wanted, right?" Everyone burst into laughter, high-fiving each other. Oh no, you can't quit now. Remember when we were sitting here? Fair's fair. You've got to follow through like we did." Gina glanced at me as if hoping I might step in, but I just said, "This is your game, not mine. I'm staying out of it." She grew more nervous, bouncing her knees and covering her face with her hands. This went on for a while before she finally said, "All right, fine, but turn your heads." They laughed again, saying, "No way! We had to do it in front of everyone, and so do you." Gina kept fidgeting, but eventually stood up with a nervous smile, saying, "I see there are no gentlemen here who might let me keep my dignity." They all laughed again, saying things like, "Nope, none here." One of them added, "But you'll still have our respect. So which will it be? Top or bottoms?" Gina looked at me again for a moment, then turned away, laughing quietly to herself. "I must be out of my mind," she said, before hurriedly pulling at her bikini bottoms and removing them quickly, sitting down again. The group reacted like it was a wild party, cheering loudly. Gina, slightly embarrassed but smiling, joked, "All right, enough. Haven't you ever seen a woman before? The group continued teasing, saying things like, "Not as amazing as you, Mrs. Arnett," and "Wow, Mr. Arnett, your wife is incredible." She couldn't stop giggling and said, "Do you realize I'm 37 and you guys are barely in your 20s? You should be chasing those carefree girls I see running around here," Gina joked. I could tell after her initial embarrassment that she was enjoying the attention and compliments from everyone. They didn't end up finishing the game, but continued sitting around, chatting and teasing each other, not too worried about the time or the 5-minute rule they had set earlier. After a while, Gina asked me to toss her a t-shirt. I grabbed one of mine, hoping it would be long enough, and threw it to her. About an hour later, one of the guys started talking about going out to find a place that was open late, mentioning something about massages and tips. Gina immediately warned them that if they tried driving in their condition, they'd regret it. But they kept talking, not taking her seriously. At one point, I noticed Gina quietly got up and took a set of car keys one of the guys had left on the nightstand, hiding them under a towel by the bathroom. I knew what she was doing, but pretended not to see. Like her, I didn't think they should be driving anywhere given how much they'd been drinking. Eventually, one of the guys said, "Let's stop talking about it and just go." He stood up, putting his shorts and t-shirt back on, and began looking around the room for his keys. Gina mischievously said, "You're not getting the keys," as she jumped onto the bed, pulling her t-shirt down to cover herself. He laughed and asked, "Okay, where did you hide them?" Gina playfully put her hand behind her back, pretending to have the keys. He knelt on the bed beside her, jokingly trying to tickle her to get the keys back. She squirmed and laughed, blocking his hands with her knees, saying, "No, you can't have them. You'll thank me tomorrow. You're too drunk to drive." Watching this playful scene unfold, I couldn't help but join in, eventually blurting out, "I know how you can get the keys." Still laughing and a bit out of breath, the guy asked, "All right, tell me, what's the secret? She's stronger than I thought." A lot of my reply was probably influenced by the drinks we'd had. As I said, "You're just not looking in the right spots." He chuckled, still trying to tickle her, saying, "I can't get to her hand, she's really strong." Gina, laughing and a little surprised, said, "Oh, nice, Scott. Telling him to try harder." "Do you really want to see them drive like this?" Gina asked. I finished my drink and replied jokingly, "No, I just wanted to see him try and get the keys." It was clear that my comment annoyed her a bit, and I knew she had had quite a bit to drink. After staring at me for a moment, Gina, clearly trying to prove a point, grabbed his hand and placed it on her shoulder, asking sarcastically, "How's that, honey? He still doesn't have the keys." Most of the group began laughing awkwardly, putting their shorts back on and gathering their things. One of them, chuckling as he headed for the door, said, "Well, if you get the keys, come find us in the room." The guy who stayed behind, Brian, laughed and said to his friend Stan, who was still nervously sitting there, "Pretty sure the keys aren't on her shoulder, man. You should probably keep looking somewhere else." Now, if you know Gina, you'll know she never backs down from a challenge. It's like a switch in her brain flips, and she won't quit. In the past, I might have played along, knowing that in situations like this, she usually counted on me to eventually step in and end it. But tonight, with the amount of alcohol she'd had, that determination was only amplified. She could be as stubborn as ever when proving a point. What Gina didn't expect, though, was that I was fine letting things continue a little longer. I was curious to see where things would go, though I knew there were boundaries neither of us would cross. Still, the playful teasing and energy in the room had my mind racing. In moments like these, my imagination would sometimes get the best of me, but I always knew that nothing serious would come of it. It was just light-hearted fun, and if anything, things would end when Gina decided she'd had enough. As she seemed to expect me to step in, I surprised her by walking over to the bed. I moved around to the other side where the guy was sitting and leaned in toward her, keeping things light. "All right," I said playfully, as I gently took her hands and pulled them back toward the bed, pinning them down in a joking manner. "Let's see where those keys are hiding." She quickly said, "All right, see? I don't have your keys." Her tone was a mix of surprise and, "Okay, the joke's over." I gently held her arms down and leaned in to give her a light kiss, asking, "Where are the keys?" I already knew where they were, but she didn't realize that. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Both of you need to let me go. I'm not telling—" While she was speaking, I playfully held her arms between my legs, securing them. I was teasing, not meaning anything serious, just continuing the light-hearted atmosphere of the moment. She grew more serious and said, "Scott, come on. Enough. You've had too much to drink." Her tone was still light, but it was clear she wanted the situation to stop. I leaned over and kissed her again, trying to ease the tension. As we kissed, she mumbled, "Scott, what are you doing?" At that point, I realized it was time to stop, so I let go of her arms. I pulled away, and the playful mood began to shift back to normal. The moment had gone a little too far, and I knew it was best to calm things down. The guy who had been tickling her earlier had also backed off, realizing things were getting a bit uncomfortable. He moved down toward the edge of the bed, still trying to keep things lighthearted. At this point, I knew Gina wasn't okay with what was happening, and she made it clear with a firm look in her eyes. She told me, "You need to stop, Scott. Let's not do something we'll regret." Her words brought everything into focus for me. I realized how important it was to respect her boundaries, especially in this situation. The playful teasing had gone too far, and it was time to bring the fun to an end. Everyone in the room took a step back, and the atmosphere slowly shifted back to something more relaxed. We all laughed awkwardly and moved on, knowing we had pushed the limits but stopped before any real harm was done. Gina flinched for a moment, reacting to the situation. Sensing her discomfort, the guy quickly pulled back, unsure of what to do next. He hesitated, realizing that the moment had shifted. I could tell Gina was feeling unsure, and I tried to guide the situation back to a calmer place. I placed my hand gently on her legs, signaling her to relax. The guy, noticing the change in mood, placed his hands lightly on her knees, but we were all aware that things had gone too far. Gina, still clear-headed, spoke softly, "Let's keep things under control." Her voice was calm but firm, indicating that she was drawing a line. I knew in that moment that what had started as a playful scenario had reached a boundary. I leaned in and kissed her gently, trying to bring comfort and reassurance. As I did, I could feel her gradually start to relax, though the tension from earlier still lingered. Slowly, her posture eased, and we both knew that it was time to stop and bring the evening back to something more normal. The intensity of the moment had passed, and though we had ventured into unexpected territory, we both realized it was best not to continue. I kissed her again, softly, trying to reassure her that everything was okay. In that instant, I felt a mix of emotions, part relief, part reflection. We had tested boundaries, but we were now back on solid ground. The evening had turned into something we hadn't expected, but I knew that our bond was strong enough to move past it. As we both caught our breath, the room quieted, and I understood that it was time to bring the night to a close. There was no need for any more words. We had pushed the limits and now had returned to what mattered most, our connection. The air was thick with the mix of cinnamon gum and alcohol on her breath as we shared a moment that was intense and emotional. Gina and I kissed awkwardly, and I could sense that things had gone further than either of us had anticipated. As we continued, I could tell the situation was escalating, and I realized it had reached a point where things were moving faster. Gina was holding my hand tightly, her eyes closed, and she whispered, "Scott, I can't believe this is happening." Her words were filled with disbelief and confusion. I raised myself up to get a better sense of what was going on. It was a strange moment, part of me trying to process everything, part of me just observing. Gina held my hand to her face, squeezing it as if trying to find some grounding in the moment. For a few minutes, the situation continued, but I could feel things changing. The mood shifted as the intensity grew, and suddenly there was a clear reaction from both of them. The man let out a loud, almost uncontrollable sound as things reached a peak. Gina quickly reacted, pressing against his chest and saying, "Not like this." Her voice was urgent, and it was clear she wanted to stop what was happening. The man pulled back, and the tension eased, but the moment had left its mark. Gina kept her hand on his chest, steadying herself as things calmed down. I knew that emotions were running high, and what had happened was overwhelming for everyone involved. It was a mix of confusion, surprise, and relief as the situation finally came to an end. I was completely mesmerized by what had just happened. The intensity of the moment left me overwhelmed, and I found myself reflecting on how things had escalated so quickly. After everything had unfolded, the man seemed utterly drained, collapsing onto the bed next to Gina. I was still caught up in the emotions of the situation, and without thinking, I moved closer to Gina, feeling the need to connect with her. As I looked at her, it was clear she had been through a lot, and I realized that the intensity of the moment had affected us all. The man, now quiet and exhausted, moved away to the other bed and began getting dressed, saying nothing. His friend, who had been nearby the whole time, seemed to think there was an invitation for him as well, but that wasn't the case. Thankfully, Gina had her back turned, unaware of what was going on. I was lost in my own thoughts, still processing everything that had happened and trying to come back to a place of normalcy. My focus shifted to reconnecting with Gina, making sure she was okay after everything we had experienced together. The room was quiet, and I knew that it was time to bring the night to a close. The energy had shifted, and all I wanted was to be there for Gina, making sure she felt safe and supported. As I leaned down to kiss Gina, I was suddenly brought back to reality. The moment felt strangely familiar, but it wasn't the same as before. Something inside me was conflicted, and the realization of what had happened left me deep in thought. Brian, who had been sitting quietly nearby, moved closer and gently touched Gina's shoulder. She kept her face turned away, clearly caught up in the emotions of the moment. Meanwhile, my mind was racing, overwhelmed by everything that had transpired. I struggled to process it all, and I found myself stepping back to reflect. As I watched, unsure of what to do next, I was tempted by a mix of curiosity and hesitation. My thoughts were jumbled, and I found myself questioning how far things had gone. In that moment, I realized I needed to step away and allow the situation to settle. I felt torn between my own emotions and the intensity of what had happened. The situation was far more complex than I had anticipated, and I knew that the best course of action was to give Gina the space she needed. The night had unfolded in ways I hadn't expected, and it was clear that we both needed time to process it all. I looked at Gina, thinking back to our years together since college. We had shared so much, and in this moment, I knew it was important to honor the connection we had built over the years. I gently kissed her one last time, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we still shared, despite the complexity of the situation. Before we got married, Gina had only had a couple of awkward experiences, and based on what she shared, it didn't seem like much had happened. There was never any mention of anything significant. But as the night progressed, my thoughts began to swirl, and I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to explore something that had only existed in my imagination. My mind, fueled by both curiosity and the situation, was torn between two paths. Should I stop everything and let things return to normal, or allow this rare moment to continue? I felt conflicted, knowing that once the moment passed, it might never happen again. I kissed Gina, feeling the familiar connection we had always shared. But then, something shifted. I stopped and took a step back, unsure if I should continue down this road. It was a moment of intense reflection, where every decision felt like it could change everything. We held each other closely, our kiss deepening. For a few moments, nothing else seemed to matter, but in the back of my mind, the question of what might happen next lingered. Despite the doubts, I made the decision to let things play out. I kissed her neck gently, savoring the intimacy of the moment. But then, everything changed when another presence in the room shifted closer. I noticed him approaching, and before I could fully process it, Gina's expression changed. She seemed surprised, and I could tell that the situation had shifted for her as well. In that instant, I realized that what had started as a fleeting thought had turned into something much more. Her reaction was a mix of surprise and confusion. She seemed to be processing everything at once, and for a brief moment, the energy in the room felt overwhelming. I could see her trying to make sense of it all, and it became clear that this wasn't something she had anticipated. As things continued, Gina's body language reflected both uncertainty and an attempt to regain control. She moved, adjusting to the situation, but I could tell from the way she reacted that this wasn't what she had expected. The moment was a strange mixture of tension and realization, and I knew that nothing would be quite the same afterward. In the end, as I reflected on everything, I realized that the night had taken a turn none of us had planned for. It became clear that the experience had been different for everyone involved, and it left us all with a lot to think about. The situation had taken a turn that none of us expected, and it felt overwhelming. Before I could fully process what was happening, everything escalated quickly. Brian, clearly caught up in the moment, reacted intensely, but it was all so brief. The energy in the room was chaotic as emotions ran high, and it became clear that things had gone further than anyone anticipated. As Brian's reactions became more intense, Gina also responded, her body tensing as she adjusted to the situation. The entire room was filled with a rush of emotion and confusion. For a moment, everything felt surreal, as if it were happening outside of reality. The intensity of the moment was overwhelming, and none of us seemed to know exactly what to do. Brian, seemingly lost in the experience, was fully caught up in the moment. His actions were instinctive, driven by the whirlwind of emotions that filled the room. Gina, reacting to everything happening around her, seemed torn between confusion and trying to regain control of the situation. I stood by, watching as things unfolded, my mind racing as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. In that instant, I wished for it all to stop, hoping for some sense of normalcy to return. But the moment had already taken on a life of its own, and all I could do was witness it. The emotions swirling through the room were impossible to describe. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I felt like an observer, watching from a distance as Gina and Brian reacted to each other. At that point, it was clear that the situation had spiraled far beyond what anyone had imagined. As everything began to settle, Brian seemed to realize what had happened, and he suddenly looked apologetic. "I'm sorry," he muttered, as if he had crossed a line. Gina and I both quickly reassured him, saying, "It's okay, relax." The tension in the room began to lift, and it was clear that Brian had been overwhelmed by the whole experience. As the reality of the situation set in, I could tell Brian was struggling to make sense of it all. He likely hadn't expected things to go this far, and was now grappling with the aftermath. For someone who probably had never done anything this intense, it was clear that he felt uneasy about what had just taken place. We quickly reassured him, telling him everything was fine and that it had just happened. Gina surprised me when she calmly said, "You're not in trouble. You're 21 and I'm 37. We're both adults, and everything that happened was with consent, so don't worry." After hearing that, he seemed to calm down and sat back on the bed. At that moment, I couldn't help but notice some of the details, like how Gina casually cleaned herself up with the sheet, clearly trying to keep things normal. She continued to speak reassuringly to him, not paying attention to the small mess left behind. Her focus was on making him feel better. After a few minutes of comforting him, he got dressed, regaining some confidence as he said, "Thank you for having me here tonight, Mrs. Arnett. I don't know what else to say, but thank you. I'm going now. I'm sorry if well, thank you." With that, he left, still thanking us on his way out the door. As soon as the door closed, Gina turned to me, rolled her eyes, and fell back onto the bed with a joking tone, saying, "Well, that was some real wholesome fun." She then asked more seriously, "That wasn't what you expected, was it?" Before I could answer, she added, "It definitely wasn't what I expected." I responded quickly, "Yes and no, I'm still processing it all." She chuckled. "What about me? When did our vacation turn into this? And what part of don't do that did he not get?" I teased her a little. "You know, the first guy didn't really listen either, right?" She rubbed her face, paused for a moment, then looked at me and said, "Yeah, I figured that out." Out of curiosity, and not entirely thinking clearly myself, I asked, "How did you know?" She hesitated, putting her hair behind her ears, then chuckled, "Come on, Scott, you know what happened." Still curious, I asked again, "But how did you know?" With a small smile, she looked at me and said, "Okay, fine. One moment he was tense, and the next I felt it. It's hard to describe, but it was like if something shifted suddenly. That's the best way I can explain it." "Okay?" She kept looking at me, and then she smiled widely and said, "Wow, I can't believe you really liked that. Why would a man want to see his wife with someone else?" I didn't really know how to answer. I just said, "I have no idea. I guess some men do, and I found out I'm one of them." She shook her head with a smile, stood up, and grabbed her pajamas from the dresser. She told me she was going to take a shower and that I shouldn't think we would do that again. She said it made her feel strange, and she wanted to just wash up and go to bed. I respected her wish because I was worried that if I pushed it, she might never want to talk about it again. I didn't want to end up explaining things to a lawyer. This was new for both of us. We were still trying to understand it. I thought we were lucky she didn't get really upset and cut our vacation short. I kept thinking, what woman wouldn't want to try something new if her husband was okay with it? But I knew that bringing it up again was not a good idea. Later on, she came to bed acting like nothing had happened. I curled up next to her, thinking that any attempt to change the mood might lead to her telling me off. She didn't say anything as she climbed into bed. Her expression said it all as she came out of the bathroom, like she was thinking, I just had a strange experience and my husband wanted it. That wasn't in our vows. During the night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't wake her, still unsure how she would feel in the morning. When we woke up, it was like any other day. We started our morning by the pool around 11:30 a.m. Neither of us mentioned what had happened. We both seemed to want to ignore it. We were the first ones outside, enjoying a peaceful moment with the ocean breeze and holding hands while chatting casually. As the sun got stronger and more people came out, we started having some drinks. We thought maybe drinking would help us feel better after everything that had happened. After a few trips back to grab more drinks, she said, If I find out they told anyone else and I'm seen as the easy target, we're leaving. That was the first time she brought it up, but I knew it was something we needed to talk about. I replied without much thought. They'd be smart not to say anything considering what happened. They were both shaken up by the situation, so I wouldn't worry about it. Gina responded, We'll see, but I'm serious. Around 2:00 p.m., one of the guys came out of his room and walked over to the pool. He saw us and moved a lounge chair beside us. In a quiet voice, he said, I'm really sorry if things got out of hand last night. I talked to Stan, and we both want to keep this private if possible. After thinking it over, it felt like we were forcing the situation, and that made us uncomfortable. I could see the relief on Gina's face. She had been worried they might tell everyone, and I had thought the same. She quickly reassured him, Don't worry about what happened, it's all fine. I agree with keeping it quiet, and I appreciate you telling us that. She gave him a quick hug and thanked him again. Later in the afternoon, the other guy came by with a similar message. After hearing from both of them, Gina started to relax and enjoy the vacation again. We spent hours talking and drinking by the pool. At one point, Gina said, We're planning to go out for some crab legs at the crab shack later. You guys should come with us. Her tone showed that she was relieved and happy they hadn't shared anything about the previous night. They both enthusiastically replied, Oh, absolutely. We've been there before and it's worth it. We kept enjoying the sun and taking dips in the pool until around 6:00 p.m. when Gina said, Okay, I'm done with the sun. If we're doing this, we need to get ready. Come to our room by 7:00 p.m. and we'll head out together. I could tell she was still relieved that everything was staying private. They thanked us again for being so cool about everything and agreed to meet us at 7:00 sharp. Back in the room after about 30 minutes, I watched Gina as she moved around in a towel after her quick shower, polishing her toenails and getting ready. Her energy was lighthearted and happy, and I could tell she was feeling much more at ease. By around 6:30 p.m., she still wasn't quite ready, so I decided to make us some drinks while we waited. It seemed like it was going to be a while. I intentionally made her drink very strong, thinking if there was any chance for something amazing to happen, I had to pull out all the stops. She made a funny face after taking a sip and asked, What did you make me? Is there any juice in this at all? We had enjoyed mixed drinks all day, but the ones I was making now were almost all alcohol. Looking back, I realized that relying on alcohol isn't a good idea. Still, I told myself it wouldn't be possible without it. I'm sure many people have found themselves in similar situations. The guys called us about 10 minutes before they were due, saying they were late because one of them had the credit card. They promised to arrive by 7:30 p.m. and asked us to wait. We said we would, but Gina wanted them to hurry since she was ready. They finally knocked on the door just before their time and seemed a bit out of breath, like they had rushed to get there. Gina was in the bathroom when they arrived, getting ready, but she heard them come in. As soon as they saw me with my drink, they asked, Could we have one of those? Everyone with us has finished what we brought. I told them they could help themselves. Gina had gone back into the bathroom, busy with her nail polish. She was very particular about matching colors and said several times, "Hang in there, I'll be quick." I knew that meant she'd take at most 10 minutes. The guys were already in high spirits, and I let them enjoy more of our drinks, which they did. At one point, Stan mixed a drink and reached his arm through the closed bathroom door, saying, "Here, I heard that polishing your nails can be stressful. You might need a drink." They both laughed and said, "What a gentleman, now go." It felt like everyone, including those young men, was trying to forget the previous night, or at least pretend it never happened. Gina came out a couple of times to grab more nail polish, making playful faces as if to say, "I need my perfect color." When she finally stepped out in her beautiful dress that fit just right, everyone fell silent. She looked amazing. There was no doubt in my mind that the guys were impressed by Gina's charm and beauty. They both seemed drawn to her, especially after the events of the previous day. What I thought would be a quick 10 minutes of Gina touching up her nail polish turned into closer to 40 minutes, especially since she ended up talking to her mother on the phone. At one point, while still on the call, Gina said, "I'm out. Bring me another." The two guys nearly tripped over themselves trying to get her another drink, each spilling part of theirs in the process, one as he reached the bathroom and the other as he handed it over at the door. When Gina finally came out after her phone call, she was in high spirits, smiling and bubbly. She joked, "Oh, I see you hogs forgot about me and started drinking without me." Once again, the guys hurried to make her a fresh drink, and she shot me a playful smile, as if she had two helpers at her beck and call. One of them then suggested, "We should wait until around 10 o'clock p.m. to go, because before that, it's too crowded and you'll be elbow to elbow with people." Gina looked a little disappointed, but agreed. "We should slow down or we'll be crawling into that place," she laughed, taking a big sip of her drink. We all teased her back, saying she should take her own advice. By 10:30 p.m., after plenty of lighthearted teasing about who was drinking too much, one of the guys joked, "We'd better be careful, or we'll end up in the same situation as last night." Gina, mid-sip, responded, "You realize that's not happening again, right, Scott?" I, still pouring another drink, joked, "Not until after we get some crab legs." The guys burst out laughing. "Oh, you're in trouble now, Scott. We didn't say anything. It was all you. We're being perfect gentlemen." Gina smiled and said, "Let's just go already," with a playful grin. We all finished our drinks, and as she passed me on her way to the door, I pulled her close for a kiss. She smiled and kissed me back for a moment before pulling away, saying, "All right, let's go." I pulled her in for another quick kiss as Stan held the door open. Gina giggled, trying to head towards the door, murmuring, "Come on, let's go." As we moved toward the door, Stan leaned against it, holding it open, and playfully tugged on the back of her dress, surprising both of us. I had my hands on her hips when Stan, standing nearby, reached out playfully. I noticed it out of the corner of my eye and immediately shifted my focus. We stood there for a moment, and Gina, trying to keep things light, laughed and asked, "Are we leaving yet?" We finally left the room, but I couldn't resist giving her a few quick kisses as we walked. She smiled at me as if to say, "Not going to happen." Meanwhile, Stan continued to playfully tease her by gently pulling at the back of her dress as we made our way toward the car. Just before we reached the foyer that led to the parking lot, I pulled Gina aside into a small nook where the vending machines were. Stan was still with us, being playful. Once inside the nook, Gina suddenly became more serious and said, "Scott, not now." She added, "Maybe later, we'll see." I could tell she was ready to keep moving, but the situation still felt a bit playful. As we lingered in the nook, the environment was anything but romantic. Fluorescent lights flickered above us, and the faint smell of suntan lotion and old spills filled the air. It was one of those odd moments that sticks in your memory because of how surreal it felt. As things began to calm down, Gina's mood shifted again, and she stood up, straightened herself, and said, "Let's at least get back to the room." Her tone was firm, and I knew she was ready to head out. Stan seemed to understand, and we all followed her out of the nook. As we walked down the hallway, Gina turned back and with a hint of sarcasm asked, "Are you two coming, or are we staying out here in the middle of the street?" When we got back to the room, there was a quiet pause, and Gina simply took off her sundress and pulled Stan onto the bed. They both moved quickly, and as they kissed, Gina helped guide him as they got comfortable. She adjusted herself, lying back, and everything seemed to unfold naturally between them. It was in that moment that I realized how much trust there was between us, and how unexpected this situation had become. Watching from the side, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, realizing how much things had shifted from the way I had always imagined them. It was something beyond anything I had thought before. As the two continued, I poured myself a drink, feeling both nervous and excited. Suddenly, Brian, who had been nearby, began undressing as well. At first, I wasn't sure what to think, but I decided to let things continue. I had no idea how far things would go, but I trusted Gina to decide when enough was enough. Brian knelt beside the bed, focusing on Gina, while she stayed close to Stan. I watched, still processing everything, but knowing that we had crossed into new territory. I sat down in a chair and watched as the energy in the room shifted. Everyone seemed to be in sync with each other. The connection was evident, but I could tell Gina was still in control, making decisions for herself, and guiding the situation where she felt comfortable. At one point, Gina glanced at me, and I saw a smile and a sense of understanding in her eyes. It was clear that she knew how I felt, and she was still the one in charge of what was happening. Her confidence reassured me, and I could tell she was aware of everything going on. The night continued, and it was clear that we had entered a new chapter. Everyone was respectful, and I felt grateful for the trust that existed between us all. The line between fantasy and reality had blurred, but there was a shared understanding that made it feel right. As Gina gasped, I could see the intensity of the moment between everyone. She turned her focus back to Brian, and he responded by gently moving closer to her. The room was filled with a quiet energy, and everything seemed to unfold naturally as they connected. After a few minutes, I noticed Stan's movements becoming more tense, indicating that things were reaching their peak for him. He pressed against Gina with a deep focus, clearly lost in the moment. Gina, reacting to the shift in energy, adjusted herself as well, leaning back into the mattress. Watching this scene, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. It was clear that the trust and connection between everyone allowed things to flow, even if it was unexpected. The room was filled with quiet tension, yet a sense of calm washed over everything. Stan eventually stepped away, catching his breath and heading toward the bathroom. Meanwhile, I moved closer to Gina, feeling the need to connect with her. I leaned in, and our moment together was quiet, but filled with a deep understanding. Everything felt natural, and we both let ourselves be fully present. Brian, still nearby, was also caught up in the moment. He moved closer again, and the energy in the room shifted once more. As we continued, I could feel the weight of the moment building, and it was clear that everything was coming to a close. As Brian's emotions reached their peak, he let out a sound of pure release, signaling the end of this shared experience. The atmosphere in the room was a mix of relief and quiet reflection. We all took a moment to breathe and process what had happened, knowing that it was a unique experience none of us had expected. I could see that Gina was gently guiding him, making sure things didn't go too far. The atmosphere was tense, but everyone seemed to understand the boundaries. After a few moments, there was a sense of relief in the room as the intensity began to ease. Once things started to calm down, Gina composed herself and let out a deep breath, signaling that the moment was over. Everyone took a step back, and the air in the room shifted. The connection between us all was clear, but we were careful to respect each other's space. I felt a surge of emotions, still processing everything that had just happened. The shared experience had been intense, and I was caught up in the rush of feelings that came with it. I knew that I had just experienced something incredibly powerful, and the bond between us all had deepened in a way I hadn't anticipated. After a few minutes, Gina smiled and made a light-hearted comment, breaking the tension. It was clear that she was aware of how impactful the moment had been for everyone. We all sat together for a while, talking casually about various topics, as if trying to normalize the situation. Even though we were discussing random things, the events of the night were still fresh in our minds. The room felt different now, as if we had all crossed a threshold and were processing the changes together. The conversation continued for about an hour, helping to bring us back to a place of calm. But eventually, the connection between us reignited, and we found ourselves drawn into another intimate encounter. This time, the atmosphere was more relaxed, with everyone participating in a way that felt natural. The night went on until the early hours of the morning, and by the end, we were all completely exhausted. We slept until the afternoon, and when we woke up, the dynamic between us was much more open. There was no need for any hesitation or coaxing. We all understood the connection that had developed, and everything felt effortless from that point on. We didn't leave the room for the last 2 days of our vacation. The mood had shifted into one of complete relaxation as we stayed in, barely venturing outside. We ordered food, ignored room service, and just enjoyed our time together. By then, Gina and I both knew that the others probably had an idea of what was happening, but it didn't bother any of us. We were in our own world, enjoying the moment. It was a time of connection and discovery, and I was amazed at how much Gina seemed to enjoy the experience. We spent our days in the room, watching TV, eating when we were hungry, and simply relaxing together. The atmosphere was casual and comfortable, and we all got along well. Sometimes the lines between normal conversation and shared intimacy blurred, but it felt completely natural. The way everyone interacted showed how comfortable we had all become in this unique situation. At one point, Gina mentioned she was getting tired of things ending just when she was close to finding her own moment of satisfaction. Sensing this, I suggested, "Why don't you use your toy?" At first, she seemed shy about it, saying, "Oh my God, not in front of you guys." But after some encouragement, she finally agreed, adding, "I'll try, but if I feel uncomfortable, I'll stop, and I don't want to hear anything about it." We all reassured her, saying, "No problem, we understand." She left the room, playfully glancing back at us, reminding us not to look until she was ready. We all laughed and promised to respect her wishes. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew it was important for Gina to feel comfortable with whatever she decided. This experience had already gone far beyond anything I had imagined. Gina stepped out of the bedroom after a couple of minutes, carrying a small massager. It wasn't a large or flashy device, just something simple that she knew how to use. Gina had always been comfortable with her body, but I could tell she was feeling a bit self-conscious now as she placed the massager under her leg and sat down, laughing and saying, "There's no way this is happening." Surprisingly, both of the guys reassured her, saying, "If you don't want to, that's totally fine. We just want you to feel comfortable and happy." Their comments seemed to relax her a little as she smiled at them. She responded by explaining, "Women are different from men when it comes to this. For us, it takes more than just the right moment. It takes the right kind of stimulation. It's not as simple as it is for men." The guys listened closely, appreciating her honesty. Gina seemed to feel better after that, scooting further up on the bed. I sat at the foot of the bed watching the interaction. Stan and Brian were both nearby, but Gina asked them to turn away, giving her some space. They did so without hesitation. She turned on the massager, and it was quiet enough that the guys even asked if she had started. "Yes. Now be quiet," she said, laughing a little. They kept their word and didn't look, respecting her space. I could see Gina looking at me a few times in the beginning, and then her focus shifted. She was calm and concentrated, taking her time. I felt at ease, watching her relax and enjoying the moment. With Gina slightly lifting her hips off the bed, everything seemed to slow down. After a moment, she moved a little, clearly still caught in the intensity of her emotions. There was a calm atmosphere in the room as things settled down. After a short while, there was a burst of energy from her partner, who exclaimed loudly in the heat of the moment. The two of them stayed close, caught up in what had just happened, but soon everything quieted down again. They remained close, still holding on to each other as the moment faded. As things started to calm, Gina whispered, asking him to stay with her for a bit longer. She was clearly still processing everything and wasn't ready for it to end. After a few minutes of rest and quiet conversation, he eventually shifted and moved away, leaving Gina resting on the bed. She lay there quietly for a little while, clearly exhausted from the experience. Brian moved closer as if to join, but she gently told him, "Not now, maybe later." Both guys mentioned they needed to step out for a bit to get a change of clothes and would return later. Gina waved, looking tired, and pulled the blanket over herself, saying, "I need a nap. Can you keep them out for a couple of hours or lock the door so I can rest?" I quickly agreed and left to grab my wallet from the car. When I returned, I carefully crept back inside, making sure not to wake her, and headed out to the porch. Feeling a bit tired myself, I was glad to see that the pool area was quiet and nearly empty. About 10 minutes later, Stan and Brian came out of their room. They waved at me, saying they were heading out for some food, asking if we needed anything. I thanked them and said we were fine, and they said they'd be back soon. I don't know how long I lay on the lounge chair before dozing off, but after a little while I began to hear Gina talking softly. Gina was lying on the bed, her body slightly off the side. She relaxed as a small stream of something dripped down her back to the sheets. There was a steady rhythm to it, repeating every second or so. After about 10 seconds of her feelings of joy, she started to move her body, and he mirrored her movements, swaying but not pushing too hard. He did this for another 20 seconds before he made some strong movements and exclaimed, "Wow, yes!" They gently pushed against each other, sharing their warmth. I watched in disbelief, both fascinated and surprised. They stayed close, as if wanting to be even more connected. Once he finished, he started to pull away. Gina held on to him and asked, "No. Please stay with me for a moment." She felt delicate and wanted the moment to last a little longer. A few minutes passed, and they began to talk. He shifted slightly, and as he pulled away, there was a quiet moment. She remained still, appearing a bit lost in her thoughts. After a minute with her feet up and hands over her eyes, Brian started to move closer to the bed. I thought she might change her mind, but she softly said, "Not now, maybe later." Stan and Brian mentioned needing to change clothes, but promised to return soon. Gina seemed very tired and waved them off, collapsing onto her back with a sigh. She pulled the blanket over herself and said, "I really need to take a nap. Can you please keep them outside for a bit or lock the door so I can sleep?" I quickly agreed, heading out to grab my wallet from the car. When I returned, I slipped quietly past her as I went to the back porch. Thankfully, the pool area was nearly empty. About 10 minutes later, Stan and Brian emerged and called out to me, asking if I wanted anything to eat. I declined, and they waved goodbye, promising to return. I'm not sure how long I lay there before dozing off in the lounge chair. Perhaps it was 10 minutes before I heard Gina speaking softly. The sliding glass door to the porch from the living room of our suite was difficult to close completely. Often, if I was in a hurry or just feeling lazy, it would stay open by an inch or two. I wasn't sure if Gina was talking in her sleep or not, but I heard something and got up from my chair. I walked over to the gap in the door and noticed one of Stan and Brian's friends lying beside Gina. He had his back to me, and I couldn't immediately tell what was going on. After everything that had happened over the past few days, I had become used to unusual moments like this. However, this time I thought I might quietly observe without making my presence known. The idea of watching without her knowing gave me a strange sense of curiosity. I left the porch and made my way around the landscaping to the sliding door leading to the bedroom. I carefully opened the door, taking my time to avoid making noise, since the tracks made a lot of sound if the door was opened too quickly. Once inside, I quietly approached the bedroom where I saw Gina. She seemed more tired than anything, clearly not in the mood for anything playful. The man next to her was trying to get her attention, but she was firmly telling him no. It was clear that Gina was in control of the situation, and she continued to insist that he should leave. Despite her refusal, he kept trying, but it seemed harmless enough as she held his hands away. I could tell she wasn't interested and was trying to end it. Just as I thought he would stop, he made a sudden move to push her legs apart, ignoring her protests. Gina's tone shifted as she told him firmly to stop. He continued to push, but Gina was still resisting. It was clear that things were going too far, and I was about to step in when Gina suddenly gave in, possibly to end the situation quickly. She looked towards the sliding glass door, clearly worried that I might walk in. I realized she was trying to get him to stop as quickly as possible, telling him to hurry. It was obvious she didn't want me to walk in on what was happening. After about 30 seconds, she started to move with him, saying over and over, "I want you to be with me." This seemed to push him to respond quickly, and soon he was deeply involved with her. He was quite overwhelmed for a short while, and then she said, "Okay, that's enough. Now go. If you tell anyone about this, I'll say you pushed me, and you'll regret it." Afterward, he apologized many times, realizing he crossed a line. In some ways, he certainly did. but in other ways, it was less clear. I knew for sure that she could have stood up for herself if she had wanted to. I felt a rush of emotions as I watched them. It was surprising and intense in a way I hadn't expected. Later, I never told her I saw it, but she mentioned it to me. She left out many details, and honestly, I couldn't judge her for anything because I had encouraged her to be open from the start. I knew if she found out I had watched, she might have been really angry with me. Eventually, Stan and Brian returned, and we chatted for a while, just enjoying the calm of the evening. But as the night went on, we ended up in a situation that felt strange and wrong. I noticed that Stan had become very taken with Gina. It felt like he had developed feelings for her. I could tell that Gina was also acting differently, and after thinking for a while, I decided it was best to end this unusual situation. I thought about saying it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but that we needed to move on. I asked Stan and Brian to leave so Gina and I could have some time together, and they were very understanding. As they left, I saw Gina looking concerned, probably wondering what I was going to say next. I suggested, why don't we get a room for a few more days, just the two of us? No more craziness, just some time together. Let's explore and have some fun. She looked at me, and I could tell she was about to share something important, which I ended up being grateful for. In that moment, Gina helped me realize how out of touch I had become with reality since that wild night when she had put herself in a vulnerable position in front of others during a game. As I stood there waiting for her to say something important, she leaned back against the wall and looked up at the ceiling. After a moment, she said, "Scott, this has been the craziest experience we've ever had, and I know that. We probably won't ever act this wildly again, but it's over now. I'm not doing this anymore." She paused for a moment, looking into my eyes, and continued, "Scott, when we were trying new things, I had a lot of fun and enjoyed it. I wanted to fulfill your ideas and even explore some of my own. But you should see that Stan and I have stopped just fooling around. He's now showing me love. I'm starting to feel uneasy about my choices." She had my full attention now as she spoke with conviction. "Did you really think I could keep being close to you and two other men without feeling something stronger? Women aren't the same as men when it comes to feelings. While it started as something casual, it's turned into more, and I'm not comfortable with it. I shouldn't be feeling this way about someone else. I think we've lost sight of our marriage vows, and I want to find them again." Sometimes we can overlook the obvious when caught up in a strong experience. As she spoke, I realized she was making solid points, ones I understood but hadn't fully acknowledged. She continued firmly, "Listen to me, Scott. We can't stay here another night. I'm a married woman and shouldn't be sharing that kind of closeness with someone else. That's not what I promised when we took our vows." To make her point clearer, she added, "Imagine being in a room with two young women and you're with both of them repeatedly. Beyond the fun, you might start to develop feelings for one of them, and that's not how married people should act. I don't like the feelings I've been having recently." Feeling embarrassed and regretful, I walked over and hugged her tightly, apologizing for everything. We held each other for what felt like a long time. I told her how much I loved her, and kept saying sorry for pushing things without considering her feelings. The truth of her words hit me hard. I'm sure things would have been different if we hadn't continued down that path. Many times I saw them holding each other closely and sharing passionate kisses. At first it seemed casual, just a moment that ended once it was over. But looking back, I realize it became more than just a simple connection between her and Stan. When she shared her feelings, it was like a light turned on for me. I think I was just not paying attention, choosing to keep going instead of facing the truth. But it was clear, and she was right. Gina then said she was going to take a shower, and off she went. A little while later, she came out and started packing our things. In no time, we were back in the car, heading home. She was so tired that she curled up in the passenger seat and fell asleep immediately. She slept for 6 hours straight, hardly moving at all. I was also drained, barely able to keep my eyes open while driving, but I pushed on, thinking that if I could just get us home, everything would feel normal again. It took a long time to get back home, but after what felt like a mountain of coffee, we finally made it. I thought it might be a while before we were close again after everything that happened during our vacation, but just a few hours after getting home, we brushed against each other in the hallway and suddenly found ourselves in the moment, embracing and losing ourselves right there. It was a wild rush of connection, something we hadn't felt like that in our home before. While some people might say they've experienced thrilling adventures like skydiving or racing a sports car, I doubt they've felt what Gina and I did on last year's vacation. Since then, we've talked about that trip many times. The funny thing is that we never get very far into the conversation before finding ourselves wrapped up in each other again. We've thought about trying something similar on our next vacation, but whenever the topic comes up, it seems to lead us back to each other. We always manage to remind ourselves that it was a one-time experience, a rare moment that came together. Our marriage means a lot to us, and we wish to keep it that way. We often ask ourselves why we would risk anything else. Sure, we talk a good game, but deep down we both know that the memory of that experience will always be with us. Sooner or later we might find ourselves in that situation again, and I worry that we may not be able to resist it. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.